Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Datavail and IDERA. I'm Stephen Fagg, Director at Database Trends and Applications in Unisphere Research. I will be your host for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled The Role of the DBA in 2022 Changes, Challenges, and Opportunities. Before we begin, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the submit button. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but if your question is not addressed during the event, you will receive an email response. Plus, all viewers today will be entered for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card just for participating. Now, to introduce our speakers for today, we have Catherine Sizemore, Senior MySQL MariaDB Database Administrator at Datavail, and Devin Gallagher, Senior Sales Engineer at IDERA. Now I'm going to pass the event over to Catherine to get us started.
Hi, thank you, Stephen. Appreciate the little intro and inviting Datavail to speak today. I'd like to talk a little bit about the topic, but first let me give a little bit of information about myself. I've been a DBA for over 8 years now, primarily working with MySQL and MariaDB, although I've done a number of conversions, migrations from Oracle, SQL Server, other sorts of things, and have quite a bit of AWS experience specifically. I work for Datavail. We're a managed service provider. We specialize in databases, data integration, and analytics. We have collectively over 17 years of database service experience and cloud experience. We, provide managed database services for over 200,000 databases and have done over 250 cloud migrations. So we're a pretty big competitor in the managed service market. Here's just a little overview of the different kinds of services we offer: projects-based, operational, managed service-based, data development services. We pretty much can do it all and customize whatever needs you have, create a contract based on that. So that's who we are and kind of what we do. So back to the topic today, I really see four parts of this question. What are the current database challenges? What's the evolution of the cloud currently, and the evolution of the DBA role with the cloud? And then what is the DBA future opportunities with that? Cloud just has such a dynamic influence on today's DBAs that's primarily what I'd like to talk about. So what are the database challenges that we're facing in the DBA realm? We want agility and innovation, speed for both infrastructure and code, right? We need cost efficiency, even more so now that with COVID and staffing reductions and such, we need to do more with less resources. Reliability, we need to have good SLAs and HA and DR needs. Scalability is very important: rapid scale up, scale down, seasonal scaling, and of course security is a huge influencer here. With the cloud, cloud is the future of databases and IT in general, but it's not a pure clean migration necessarily. Most of the customers I see will do both hybrid clouds, multi-clouds, on-prem and in cloud. So it's a very heterogeneous mix there. we're also looking at, we have infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, database as a service, and now serverless options, all giving more options for, how much your organization is going to be involved in the actual management of these systems. Monolithic versus microservices, we're seeing the evolution of coding and applications moving towards microservices, but there's a lot of still legacy applications that are in that monolithic state. So I see a lot of hybrid there as well, trying to move to more of the microservices model. We're also seeing data is king. So there's a lot of diverse data architectures bringing in a lot of different types of data. We hear things like data lakes and whatnot, where we're just capturing as much data as we can in different ways, which leads to different heterogeneous database ecosystems. We've got big data, like MongoDBs. We've got analytical databases. We've got the legacy databases. We have the new, microservices model with quick, web-based databases, etc. So we're coming into this realm of it's no longer, Oracle and a monolithic application. We're looking at very heterogeneous mixed data sets and types and architectures that can get pretty complicated as they continue to grow. But there's also a big push for databases on containers, Kubernetes, etc., where that seems to be a growing future for databases. I would say that 2 years ago we weren't ready for that necessarily. That Kubernetes, most applications had a lot of most databases had a lot of challenges being on containers, but that is definitely the future of both applications and database architectures is running on containerization. So how does this affect our database role, this giant migration to the cloud? In the past, we were very reactive. DBAs were there to be on call, taking all the alerts, be the operational response to keep the lights on, right? We would have teams of 5 or 10 DBAs all managing the database servers in large companies, and that's just not where we're at today. And with AWS marketing and all of these managed database offerings, database as a service, companies are being marketed that DBAs are, you don't need as many DBAs. You don't even necessarily need DBAs marketing. Go to, say, Aurora or any of these managed database options, and you can minimize your DBA footprint, your cost there. The reality is that they will go to that cloud option and realize that they really do need the DBA because they don't know the architectural needs there. They don't know how to optimize the database or do that kind of maintenance and forward thinking and provisioning that needs to come as a strategic DBA. So where we used to have teams of 10 people all dealing with the infrastructure and alerts and managing the hardware limitations of the database and moving data and whatnot, with the cloud, we can become more strategic, being architectural consultants, focusing on growth and scaling right? Design, have influence over the design and architecture and long-term strategies. And that's really where our role is most needed. Preparing for that new technology, migrations, etc., where we're focused on the long-term strategy, and that can greatly reduce the need of the size of your team on the DBAs, but you become much more instrumental in long-term goals for the company. So let's talk a little bit about the DBA function as a managed database service, right? So now instead of a team of 10 staffers with managed database services, we can focus more on database architecture and design, creating that best practice image that can be replicated for future databases, planning for capacity, making sure that high availability and scalability options are primarily focused on, making sure you've got cost optimizations. I can't tell you how many companies I've seen think they didn't need a DBA and spin up huge instances of Aurora or some other managed database where it was totally cost prohibitive. And I feel like the AWS motto is, if you're having performance issues, just double the size of the instance, right? So with a competent DBA that knows what they're doing, they can look at the system and improve the performance without doing huge cost options, right? So focusing on tuning the actual system instead of just paying more money. Platform operations, we're focused on making sure our SLAs are strong, troubleshooting performance issues, making sure backup management and maintenance are performed properly, restoring, having good restores and recovery, and even testing that, because sometimes you don't know it's broken until you test it. Focusing on migrations and conversions, and then new features and enhancements that we can add to the database, etc. The DBA here can also really get into collaboration with app dev and even DevOps, helping to improve the schema design and the data management, getting into change management, and being more integrated with the DevOps teams for deployments. Query optimization and performance tuning we kind of already talked about, but this is where we come in when we're not bogged down by alerts and just keeping the lights on. And then of course security is a huge concern in today's market. You don't want to be caught with ransomware or anything that can breach your system. So that's always going to be the DBA's biggest concern is user management and access management, making sure that you're following all the security and audit requirements, all your certifications, etc., and making sure that encryption is there all the way through, so you're protecting your data. So then, transitioning from that kind of older DBA model to the future, there are a number of DBA opportunities to improve your standing and the benefits to your company, right? When you're not just dealing with alerts, you can focus on aligning with the business goals and even your future career goals, training and developing your skills in more areas like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud Provider, getting trained in some DevOps skill sets and automation, especially. So, you know, some of the names that have been thrown out for the future of DBAs is more of data architects or data engineers, someone who specializes in data analytics. I would consider myself, you know, a migration specialist. That's a key skill set that's definitely needed in this day and age. Security specialists, and just improving those diversity of skills so that you've got multiple tools in your toolkit, right? Being much more strategic and engaging rather than just dealing with alerts. I would also say that there's a big trend here moving towards managed service providers, not just like AWS hosted services, et cetera, but moving to having companies like Datavail supplement your team so that you have someone focused on the overall health of your system, the getting into the nitty-gritty of your databases, but not necessarily having to have full DBA staff to do that in-house. You know, Datavail specifically, we have round-the-clock coverage, and you don't necessarily need to pay for a full DBA salary. You can do quarter DBA staff or half DBA staff, and still, you know, consolidate your footprint there while still having the full capacity or knowledge base and round the clock support that you need to perform to have optimal performance of your systems. And this all enables you and your team to focus on strategic projects and initiatives long term, and stop getting into the day-to-day grit of keeping the lights on, right? Well, thank you. That's kind of my little spiel here, but we'll get more into it with questions after Devin's presentation. So.
Thank you very much, Catherine. This time I'd like to reintroduce our second speaker for today. Once again, Devin Gallagher, Senior Sales Engineer at IDERA.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Catherine. That was very informative. I'm with IDERA and been a systems consultant or systems engineer for over 2 decades now with some of the well-known tools vendors. And then IDERA has grown quite a bit over the past few years with a number of acquisitions. So many of you probably know some of the database companies that have joined IDERA, from Embarcadero to Precise, and maybe more recently Warescape and Cubole. And then we have some other business units for DevOps and testing. And so there's a number of solutions we'd like to talk to you about, or visit IDERA.com, or IDERA Corp is where you can see the whole scope of the IDERA family. And then I hadn't worked with Catherine before, but we have a well-known tool in the MariaDB and MySQL space, Monyog, SQL Diagnostic Manager for MariaDB, and the Datavail group apparently knows that very well. So that was great to hear. And this presentation is to mix things up a little bit, maybe some terms you haven't heard in terms of the future, and then some of the challenges you probably are aware of. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the opportunities ahead with the Q&A. But this is an interesting presentation we put together, showing some of the scope of data growth, and then, again, some of the complexity of cloud or on-premise. And so here's just a quick agenda, some of those challenges, and then maybe ways that we can help, or vendors like Datavail and IDERA can help. Okay, so digital transformation is probably a term we're all hearing a little bit more, and DevOps ties into that. We have some slides here on data growth volumes and some of the new terms for those metrics, but created a little 4V way to explain these areas of growth and complexity. So increasing volumes of data, variety, right? The complexity of platforms, security, that's vigilance, and then the speed that you're required to deploy these database changes and applications. So that's what the next few slides present, and pretty interesting, some of the things that that you'll see here. So it's a fun presentation to deliver. Here's a little grouping of those, right? So just the number of databases and scope of DBA's responsibility has changed from perhaps single platform or maybe a couple of platforms to many and variations in complexity, right? The variety changes, right? So where those are hosted perhaps is something you're exploring. And then not all applications or databases are ready for the cloud. So there's a balance there of what applications are cloud ready or what should stay on premise, and then which cloud vendor will you use, right? So there's three big ones, maybe Oracle we could throw in there. So we have some fun slides on this. And then just the speed and a DBA's day, right, has more demands than ever before. So this ended with a 13 total, and there's a little shamrock for the lucky 13. So fun that this rolled into March and St. Patrick's month, right? Okay, so here's some terms of the metrics and size of growth, and maybe these are terms you haven't heard of, right? So after terabyte, exabyte, zettabyte, yottabyte, and within a few years we'll be at this level, right? So by 2025, we'll be up to 180 billion terabytes of data, right? So you can just see with the bar graph there what's gone on over the 10, 12 years that that's showing. And then just that gray box is just a representative of how tiny a petabyte would be compared to an exabyte and then a zettabyte, right? So a zettabyte is 1 billion terabytes. And we'll be at 180 billion terabytes of data within 2 or 3 years. So who's going to manage that, right? So the DBAs are responsible for most of this. Here's maybe a look at the old days where you had maybe a couple of platforms and a couple of versions that you're managing. But that's obviously changed, right? And even if you had only those two platforms, that wouldn't be easy anymore, right? So here's perhaps an example of even two platforms. You'd have probably 4 to 6 versions, maybe of Oracle, probably many versions of SQL Server, as well as new platforms, right? So you probably added some open source with Postgres or MySQL, and keeping up with these technologies is difficult, right? And so that's where you need to stay current, right? Join seminars like this, stay current on blogs, and try to keep up. So you've heard probably some of these new architectures, right? So we've gone from relational databases to NoSQL, right? Now document, key value, graph DB, column databases, right? So the complexity is increasing. You can see some of the different vendors there, Mongo, Cassandra, and you're probably having to make decisions on where to take your applications or databases as well. And so there's specific choices to make, right? You have data warehouse, data lakes. So those are areas that IDERA's dove into as well. And so we have automation for data warehousing, and Qubole is a data lake application that can help if that's an area you're exploring. And then some of these are custom to certain business applications, right? So you can see some of those there with Hadoop, Presto. And then the cloud vendors, right? The next slide we have is a little graph on the big three in the Gartner quadrant, but Azure, IBM Cloud, and Watson, right? So we're all having to make these choices and balance control of your environments with the cloud vendors. And so some choices need to be made there, right? So here's the Gartner quadrants, or you can see where this was taken from. And, top right, you see Google, Azure, and Amazon, and then Oracle probably could be considered in there. But if you look at the circle graph, that 42% of cloud environments are not in the big three, right? So Oracle would be a big percent there, but you have some choices to make, and this is evolving, so you need to explore and stay current. And then you have some of the same terminology but different terminology, right? So you can see this list here with those big four, and then what those different terms mean, right? So you have Google Compute Engine, Google App Engine, Cloud SQL, Cloud Functions, etc., right? So Amazon, Microsoft, they all have their variations, but all very similar, right? So different but similar. And then look at the complexity here with what databases certain vendors are releasing, right? So specific database configurations for the different application environments, right? And you see RDS with AWS, which is a bit of as Catherine was mentioning, a container and an application container. So Docker versus Kubernetes, you need to explore. RDS is a little bit of a control environment. So if you need root access or certain control, you wouldn't be able to with something like RDS, right? So you need to explore what goals you have and what control you can give up or not give up. Vigilance was one of the V's here, and so this is just some of the security complexity, but you probably have a security team that's handling this more than, say, just the DBAs responsible for this now, right? So just some of the standards, and we have a link here where you can see more on this. But obviously, complexity, right, from GDPR, ISO standards, pretty complex environment here, just to keep your data safe, right? Okay, and then just to wrap up, speed, right? More quickly yesterday, right? So here's just a quick comment, right? This is urgent. I need it yesterday. That's not a priority anymore. Do this instead. Urgent, ASAP. So slow day for DBA, and then how do you keep yourself sane, right? Maybe companies like Datavail and IDERA can help. So we have some other information to share with you here, but let me hand it back over to Stephen and the team.
Thank you very much, Devin, and I love that last slide. A lot going on there.
Yeah.
So this really is an important topic for database trends and applications and our audience. So we wanted to leave a good amount of time today to really have a discussion to kind of dive into the different things that are taking place in the industry and how they're impacting database administration. And of course, all of you that are currently watching, anything on your mind, don't hesitate to shoot us a question. But to kick things off, what do you see as the top trends shaping the direction of database management today? And Devin, why don't you go first?
All right. So yeah, we were starting to address some of them, cloud or non-cloud, right? So that's a big one in terms of trends, obviously size and complexity, and then just higher expectations of databases and performance and DBAs. So I'd say, the hybrid environments, deciding between, on-prem or cloud, increased workload, right, with probably less staff, right, less of a team and demand of more. And then some of the maybe the great resignation elements that we'll talk about. Obviously, it's been a tough couple of years with COVID, but working remotely has changed, and where you can work remotely with some of the the wage balances that have gone on now. So these are things that are affecting the future in terms of that question, Stephen.
Understood. Catherine, would love to hear your thoughts. Anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, Those are all great points that Devin pointed out. I also think there's a big trend towards, more managed services, or at least infrastructure as a service, maybe even platform as a service, and kind of outsourcing some of that management. Companies focusing on what they do best, and offloading some of that database or infrastructure load to companies like Datavail, et cetera. I
Sure.
also see that, I think it's been prevalent for the last few years, especially, but I still see a great trend from these big Oracle SQL Server, models to the open source communities, whether that be, hosted something like Aurora, where it's based on open source, or actually just reducing your cost significantly and going with MariaDB or MySQL or Postgres. So I think that's still an underlying factor in all of this to reduce cost as well.
That's interesting. Our next question, and Devin, I'm going to let you go first. I love this question. Is cloud making the job of the DBA harder or easier?
Well, probably a balance, but I would have to lean towards harder, right? Just the complexity of the different cloud vendors, what your application is, and whether it is cloud ready, right? So that's something to explore and figure out. We have maybe I have a couple of things to mention there, just to balance, right? There's different reasons for deciding whether on premise or not. And so just having to go through that, it makes it more complex. So there's that. If you do move to the cloud, then there's obviously benefits there, but a balance of maybe not having as much control. So you probably are leaning towards a hybrid cloud environment where you have a combination of on-prem and cloud or hosted. It's, I say hosted from years ago, right? Where, cloud's a good term, but these tie down to servers somewhere. And so, where those are hosted was maybe an old term, now cloud, where you can access from different places. But, latency, regulations, cost, these are balances to decide whether cloud or on-prem. And that makes things more complex in my impression.
Understood. Catherine, how about you? Harder, easier, maybe a little bit in between?
I agree with some of Devin's points, where it does make it more difficult. We have to expand our skill sets. And there is kind of a loss of control with some of these platform services, or database as a service. You lose a lot of control. But I think overall it's becoming easier. The marketing out there is that it's going to be so simple. Just put all your data up in the cloud, and we'll take care of it for you. That's not the reality, right? It's much more complicated than that, and you still need the DBA skill set to come in and tune those databases. Someone who actually knows about databases that can make it actually run without spending thousands and thousands of dollars on the biggest size databases you can buy. But with the cloud comes cloud automation, and now we can spin up things in seconds, where before it would take weeks to provision the infrastructure to spin up those databases. And scaling is so much easier, and there's so much that we can do with these services that would take us weeks and weeks, or even just automatically increasing the size of our disk space, where I remember 10 years ago I'd have to spend a week planning the provisioning of a new hard drive because I ran out of hard drive space, and that was a monthly occurrence that you had to provision and plan for these giant hardware updates that now we don't even have to think about it. So yes, we're going to have to increase our skill set and learn some of these automations and maybe a little bit of programming, et cetera, to utilize the cloud to its fullest capacity. But at the same time, that's going to make our lives easier, and it already has.
Mm-hmm.
Understood. We actually had
let me add, Stephen, virtualization years ago was similar, right? When virtual machines and things we could do very quickly, and now cloud similar. So, funny how things come around in similar ways. What's ahead? What's next?
Absolutely. That's actually a good segue into our next question. And Catherine, I think you were getting at that a little bit, and Devin as well. Is automation replacing the traditional role of the DBA? And Devin, how about you weigh in first?
Well, I wouldn't say replacing. I mean, DBAs still have the same responsibilities, right? They need to take care of the database, and automation can help, but it's almost when you get time back in the day, does it just give you more time to do more work, or do you actually give yourself some more free time? So probably a combination, right? So automation helps, but then you'll just have other responsibilities to tackle as well.
Understood. Catherine, how about you?
I don't think that automation replaces the role of the DBA. It may replace some of our traditional, former responsibilities. We can move away from those, keep the lights on, reactive, band-aiding, getting in the nitty-gritty of hardware and infrastructure and patching and all of that. It takes away that level of complexity. And allows us to be much more strategic and taking on that more of an engineer, architect role, proactive foresight of the database. So I think it just allows us to be much more efficient and focused and effective with aligning with the long-term goals of the company, where we're not just, whacking moles all day long. So.
Yeah.
Understood. So what are the top skills in demand for DBAs today? And Devin, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, obviously some of the same experience and skill set are required, but now extending that, right? Not just single database platforms. You really need to be familiar with multiple platforms, whether it's an acquisition that your company makes and suddenly you have a different database that you need to support, or just to make yourself more valuable. So just keeping up with the different platforms, and then the complexity, right? So we've talked about cloud and on-premise a lot. Open source, Catherine was mentioning, versus paid vendors, right? So these are things you need to understand, and what you give up with, say, open source, or not paying for things, and then other things take time, and time is money, and time is valuable. So having a skill set, staying current, being diversified in terms of platforms, and then having the people skills, right? We forget that sometimes, where a lot of this great resignation has to do with some of the management shortcomings and working with people, and so you really need to have that balance as well as the technology and experience.
Sure. Catherine, how about your thoughts on this?
So kind of riffing off what Devin was saying, with the multiple hybrid database types and infrastructures, and, I think that a key skill set is migration and ETL support. Being able to move data quickly and efficiently, whether it's migrating everything off of Oracle onto MariaDB, or doing ETLs to keep everything in sync in this quote data lake environment. That's a huge one. And then going back to some of the stuff we've already talked about, performance optimization. When you end up with a company who's migrated to the cloud and they didn't have a DBA on board, being able to performance tune that and get them a good cost optimization and a smooth running database is huge. Also being focused on that architectural design, long-term goals of the company, and being able to automate processes. Those are all really key factors that we need to have in this new environment.
Do you think the days of developing expertise around one platform, for example, SQL Server or Oracle, those are basically over at this point? Devin?
Fair. Yeah. I mean, we've said this a few times, right? Where things have grown and DBAs need to be multi-platform, cross-platform, also where those are hosted, right? And then, yeah, I mean, I think that's definite that those days are over. But you still have the need for expertise in a single platform, and the big vendor shops, the big SQL Server, Oracle, being experts at those platforms are still a skill set that's needed. So it's a balance that maybe it shouldn't have gone away in terms of that being the way it used to be, but you need to be multi-platform now, definitely.
Understood. Catherine, as a DBA, is having expertise across some of the major cloud platforms kind of table stakes these days from a career standpoint?
I think so. DBAs need to be experienced with lots of different things, because the reality of our environments, all these companies' environments are no longer homogeneous, right? We're not dealing with monolithic single database environments anymore. It's much more diverse, cloud and on-prem, and big data, historical legacy architectures integrating with new microsystem on open source databases. So we've got this total menagerie or collage of different different
Yep.
platforms and types and whatnot, and you just have to keep adding to your toolkit, adding to your Swiss Army knife of skill sets to be able to fully support your company.
Understood. And it's funny, we one of our viewers just commented, well, it's a question: how has the role of the DBA changed with migration to cloud data platforms like Databricks, Redshift, and Snowflake? And those do seem to be gaining in popularity. Are you seeing that?
Sure. Yeah, Snowflake is growing quite a bit. Yeah.
I think that analytics. Sorry, Devin. I think that analytics in general is becoming much more critical to everyone's environments, right? We've got all of this data, and it's even more important now to be able to utilize that data effectively and quickly to be responsive to what we're learning through that, right? Machine learning kind of things. So I would even add, MariaDB's column store to that list for performance. But analytics is the future, right? That's going to be a huge factor, and adding that other piece to your toolkit is going to be important.
Great point.
Because that's what companies need.
Mm-hmm.
Devin, you mentioned data security before. Obviously, major concern to corporate leaders in the world today for fairly obvious reasons. No one wants to be in the headlines. How is the role of the DBA evolving from a security standpoint?
Well, one thing I mentioned is that you probably have a very robust security team now, right? Where there's lots of compliance that maybe is handled not by the DBA. And so I think that responsibility has grown and is, perhaps more important than ever with some of the, the fears and hacks and corrupting your data. But I do tend to think that the DBA world has been supported more with the security teams and those applications, maybe more so than them being the only ones responsible for security. But that slide had a number of the standards I'm a little less familiar with, but from even Europe being a little ahead of North America in terms of some of their restrictions and GDPR and data vault and things like that. So it's increasing, and it's important that it does, right? Because we're all online. We're all at risk of these hacks, and even at the regular person knows what a hack is now compared to a DBA fearing that for their job security.
Sure. No, absolutely. Catherine, we had a question come in during your presentation that is related to security. From your experience and current collaborations with cloud providers, what are some challenges and solutions for handling data security during migration and future operations and management of databases in the cloud?
So it's, migration is a little bit more vulnerable. Let's say you have to make sure that everywhere your data is going to end up or be streamed or whatnot is within that same protected environment. But this is a huge concern across the board, where it used to be that everyone was afraid to go to the cloud because they were worried about security and access to your data. You can't just lock your data in a room anymore and think it's secure. But engaging with your security compliance person or team or whatnot, and your networking environment people, making sure that every element of your pipeline, everywhere that your data rests is encrypted on multiple levels and is encrypted in transit and at rest, that you've not left any security holes in your cloud environment. There are just so many levels now that we need to be aware of and protecting our data. And ransomware is a huge issue. Making sure you have protected copies of your database, that even if your mainstream line was your main data points were vulnerable or hacked, being able to get something separate off-site that they couldn't access back up and running is critical. So there's just so many elements to security that you really need to engage with an expert if you're not super well versed yourself already.
Understood. I'd like to get into the Great Resignation. You brought that up before, Devin, but first, kind of a comment that came in that I think kind of sets the tone. As a senior system DBA, we understand that all the marketing hype of easier, faster is what the executives are buying, so they expect us to deliver more and do it faster. Oh, by the way, we are not replacing Joe that left last week. So over the past year, we've heard about the Great Resignation, people leaving jobs. And this has impacted some industries more than others. Leisure and accommodations, absolutely. However, based on reports, it certainly appears that this has had an impact on tech as well. So, Devin, do you see a skills shortage in the database world? Are teams basically being asked to do more with less staff? Is that how it's going?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And funny the way that attendee phrased that. By the way, we're not replacing someone. So yeah, so that example is a good one, where you lose people and they may not be replaced, and then those responsibilities are just spread across the team. I was, looking into some of the numbers of the job resignations, and January apparently topped this past November as the highest total. I think over 4 million people resigned in January. So so this is a factor, and it's increasing the responsibilities on the plate of a DBA, and then there's different factors, right, that are influencing this, and it's maybe not money and monetary as number one anymore. So I was mentioning some of the wage neutralization, right, of now you can work remotely and perhaps have a wage of a location that previously required you to be there. But then this leads to that lack of appreciation and not feeling valued, and that's the biggest factor apparently that's gone on with the Great Resignation, and leading into some of the maybe lack of management, where I heard a phrase: people don't leave companies, people leave managers. And so maybe that hasn't changed as much in terms of how we handle management, how we handle the balance of responsibilities on employees that are spread thin, and DBAs obviously have the brunt of that, and then the skill set isn't easily replaced, right? And so it's not easy to replace someone that has many years experience, and the 35 to 45-year-old age group is the largest group of resignations. And so that's 15 plus years of experience of people that you can't just replace.
Sure. So kind of in a similar vein, during the pandemic and continuing into today, companies had to pivot as far as remote access for workers. Catherine, even today, how can companies continually improve that balancing out between an increase in remote access while also ensuring security and governance?
So that's been a huge concern, with COVID. I think because we shifted so quickly and rapidly and in mass, that there were probably quite a few security breaches that were kind of allowed, just to get it out to market, right? To get it out to your remote workers. Some companies were great and had that all taken care of, late nights with big IT teams getting this ready. But I think that a lot of companies are having to go back and make sure that those securities are back in place and shored up. It's it's difficult because now that everyone's at home, it's not on their computers. You're opening yourself up to that vulnerability of the human, right? Vulnerability, where really we're going to have to come back and educate our staff, make sure that they know what is okay and what is not okay with this remote work environment, right? Making sure that they are not the breach, even if we have everything else of the pipeline taken care of. And another huge principle that we love as DBAs is the principle of least privilege, making sure that they don't have access to anything that they don't absolutely need access to, so that even when those sort of breaches occur from the uneducated staff person that thinks they're just checking their personal email, that a hacker can't get access to more than that person should ever have had access to. So it's a complicated question. It's a question that we're all struggling with, but I think that it needs to be a high priority for every company now.
Understood. We have a lot of questions that have come in from viewers, so I want to make sure we get to these as well. And I know we're starting to run out of time, but people are staying with us. It's an interesting discussion. So One question, as there are so many cloud vendors and so many certifications offered, do you find possessing any of these certifications valuable? Devin, your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, certifications can be valuable. I'm not sure the scope of all the certifications you mean. I don't know if I can expand on that much more.
I'll jump in there.
Great.
I think that the skill set is more important, but if you're out looking for a job or looking to increase your standing, etc., sometimes that can just open a door that may have not have been open to you before. But definitely the skill set is far more important, and I will always say that. I as a person that majored in history and religion in college, the piece of paper doesn't necessarily say that that's your full competency level, right? Knowing the platform, knowing how to use the system is far more important.
Great points there, Catherine. Maybe I don't feel as intimidated with some of the email signatures and titles and certifications people list. So good points there. Skill set more important.
Okay, next question. Do you see companies moving more towards PaaS offering for database or infrastructure as a service in the cloud? And Devin, why don't we start with your thoughts on that?
A little curveball there. Good question. I'm not able to expand on that much.
I'll jump in. I think that it really depends on the needs of the company. So I see a lot of variety there of both infrastructure as a service can be very, very important, very, very utilized across the board. But platform as a service, if you're running something smaller, if you are doing a dev environment, et cetera, it can be extremely valuable for those as well. Certainly, it's popular on both sides, and sometimes the wrong one is chosen, I would say, where they could have used infrastructure of a service more effectively. But it's definitely something that you should consider depending on your needs and depending on your database size and all these other factors.
Understood. Okay, so I think we have one more time for one more audience question, and then I have a question I'd like you to both weigh in on. The question from our audience: cloud vendors push their managed services, but actually do very little except keep the lights on, and internal leadership doesn't understand this gap. What is the most effective way to fill that gap? Devin, any thoughts on this?
Let me pass to Catherine.
So this is a great question because it's so true. The cloud vendors are advertising that that's it, we'll take care of everything, but it's a huge gap between just running this infrastructure database and keeping the lights on and actually being performance tuned and operationally sound, right? It's great if I put you in Aurora, but if you don't know what you're doing, if you're not running performant queries, if you're not tuned, if you're not performing right maintenance on that system, you're going to have a very slow, sluggish, compromised application experience. So, I mean, some of it is counteracting that cloud marketing. Some of it is getting them to understand that you need more than just that base level, and some of them will unfortunately learn the hard way, where they get up there and then they're like, oh my gosh, we used to perform so well and now our application is crashing all the time and we're having all of these issues, and then they end up going to more something like Datavail, getting involved with a managed service provider that can come in quickly and assess and improve that service, improve that database by filling that gap. Sometimes, the DBAs are overlooked and our voices aren't always heard, but when it's very visible, when it's evident, when they learn the hard way, sometimes that's the only way we can get their attention.
Understood. I'd like to close out today by asking you each a question to weigh in on. And Devin, why don't we start with you? If there's one thing you'd like our viewers today to walk away keeping in mind, what would that be?
IDERA can help with these issues. We'd love to partner with you.
All right. And Catherine, how about you?
The landscape of databases is changing, and we're going to have to, as DBAs, improve our toolkit, increase our skill set level, and kind of change our outlook. Certainly Datavail can help be that Swiss Army knife for you, but I encourage people to embrace the cloud and utilize all that it has to offer.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the attendee questions today. If you did ask a question, as I mentioned before, and we weren't able to get you an answer today, we will send you an answer by email. I'd like to give a huge thank you to our speakers for coming on board today, sharing their insights, opinions, and expertise. Once again, Catherine Sizemore, Senior MySQL and MariaDB Database Administrator at Datavail, and Devin Gallagher, Senior Sales Engineer at IDERA. If you would like to review this presentation or send it to a colleague, you can use the same URL that you used for today's live event. It will be archived. This will probably be up on dbta.com tomorrow afternoon. You'll get an email once that archive is up. And if you would like a PDF of the deck, you can go to the handouts section on the console once the archive is live. You can grab it there. Also, again, just for participating in today's event, you could win this $100 Amazon gift card. The winner will be announced on March 31st. We will reach out to you via email if you are the lucky viewer. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everybody. Always engaging with DBTA. Thanks.